You realize that the year 2000 was a quarter of a century ago? Well, never mind about all that. How are you feeling? You got John Riggs here, checking out the Nintendo 64 games that came out in the year 2000. Not all of them, but we're going to cover a lot of them in this video. Nintendo 64 rolling strong still into the year 2000. It still took another year for the GameCube to come out, and there's some great games that came out in the year 2000. Just for fun, I make custom air fresheners. It gives me a thing to sell on my website. This one smells like a 1980s arcade, menthol cigarettes, wood paneling, spilt Coke, used gum. I have 9 oddly specific custom air fresheners on my website. This one is the one that sells the best for some unknown reason. I don't know. But it's fun all the same. And if you're already subscribed, a huge shout out for you. I appreciate it. If you haven't done so yet, hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate it. I'll keep on doing videos just like this, so we can talk about awesome games like Super Bowling 64. Well, again, the bowling games are an underrated genre of video games. The bowling games are usually pretty playable and also oftentimes pretty decent. Now with Super Bowling 64, you can choose from a few different characters even, as well as a few different lanes that you can unlock later as well. That's right, no DLC in this 64 game. You have to unlock them by virtue of playing the game. Remember that? Remember those days? Oh, weren't they great? I like it because you have to aim twice. Like you kind of aim about where you want to throw, and then you have to aim where you're gonna stand. And then with your power meter and all that, you toss the ball down the lane. It's bowling at the end of the day, and it plays really well. And there's also like other versions too, like you can play golf. It's not really golf, but it's like golf scoring in a way, but you're still bowling, if that makes sense. Anyway, Super Bowling 64, if you haven't checked it out, you're just like, bowling game, whatever. You know, I'm too busy playing, the other cool games that came out for the 64. It's actually pretty fun. Mario Party 2 comes out near the beginning of the year. Continuing with Mario Party 1, this one just basically gives you new maps to choose from, new gameplay, new battlefields, new boards, I suppose you could call them. This one's kind of fun because depending on the level you're on, you'll have a different costume, which is like, okay, that's kind of cute. I guess we can do that. Other than that, it's just more Mario Party. You gotta love it. Vigilante 8 Second Defense comes out. I don't know why I'm not as tied to Vigilante 8 as I am Twisted Metal, because I was all about Twisted Metal when it first came out for the PlayStation 1. I was all about Twisted Metal, played the holy bejesus out of it, and then I played Twisted Metal 2 a ton. Twisted Metal 3 comes out, I'm like, I wasn't as attached to it, but Vigilante 8 filled that void. As if, and maybe it happened, I don't know. I did, again, as always, if you know me and my videos, I do zero research, it's all nostalgic memory. It's like the team from the original Twisted Metal left and then made Vigilante 8. Is that pretty close to the truth? So then when Vigilante 8 Second Defense comes out, where you can play as like a motorcycle with a sidecar, which I loved the storyline that it's like the all-star team or whatever, like not quite like the Globetrotters, but they're like Evel Knievel, but not real, I don't know. Cool story. You can play as like a bus in this one. It's more of that Twisted Metal style of game, but Vigilante 8 Second Defense. If you loved Twisted Metal and you're just like, I missed that, but you never played this one, this is like old school Twisted Metal, man. You're gonna love it. Ridge Racer 64. We get Ridge Racer 64. Now, Ridge Racer for the PlayStation 1 came out 5 years prior, and now we get Ridge Racer for the 64. And again, I was still stuck in that Ridge Racer on 64, but Ridge Racer is a PlayStation game. Well, no, it's from Namco, and Namco can make games for anyone they want. And hey, you know what? If you didn't have a PlayStation, but your parents got you the 64, well, now you can play Ridge Racer 64, and it actually plays pretty well on the 64. Tarzan comes out. It is your easy, side-scrolling, they called it 2.5D. It's a 2D game, but because it's using polygons, you can still have a little bit of depth with it. Made for kids, Disney game with Tarzan. You got the MIDI Phil Collins music in the background. Yeah, you know. ECW comes out, Extreme Championship Wrestling. I was a huge ECW fan, especially in the year 2000. Now, we have the WWE games, or WWF at the time, with the Aki engine, which is what you want. So now the team behind the other, like the WWF Raw's War and the Attitude game that were terrible, now they're making ECW games. Well, we still had to play it, we still had to look at it because, oh my god, it's ECW. ECW is popular enough to get its own video game now, because ECW was like pretty underground without it being too underground, you know what I mean? And it's like, oh, it actually has a video game? Cool, let's support it. And then you get it and it's like, it's not great. But at least they had one. South Park Rally. was a game that came out. Another South Park game, still gotta love the South Park games. This one is very Mario Kart-esque, where you can just drive around the tracks. Now this one's kind of nice because it has multiple paths you can take that's visible on the map, which that's not so bad. And starts off with some basic characters. You can unlock a lot of characters later on too, including Jesus. This may be the first game where Jesus is a playable character in a racing game, maybe? Quite literally, Jesus take the wheel. It's another Mario Kart game. You can pick up items and stuff like that. It's all right. It was kind of fun. Hydro Thunder is a racing game. Again, 64 loves their racing games, and Hydro Thunder is a hydroplane speedboat racing game. And I come from Washington State. I'm on the east side of Washington, where near Tri-Cities, I used to live in Tri-Cities for a couple years. The Water Follies, huge event. Huge event is the Water Follies. We have all these hydros on the Columbia River, speedboats and all the hydroplanes and all that too. Very, very big thing for that area. So it was cool to see this as a video game. And the video game didn't have that same feel, unfortunately, but at least it's something. It's give it another racing game, but hey, now you're a boat. Cool. Pokemon Stadium came out, and this was the Pokemon game that I could get behind. I knew nothing about Pokemon outside of a few of them, the kind of like the main characters that you would see in toys and cartoons and stuff like that. And so now here's a game that's a battle game, but you're actually playing as the Pokemon in a battle form and not going around collecting and doing all that stuff. So you can actually challenge your friends in this Pokemon game versus each other, which I thought was pretty fun for the time. So even though I knew nothing about Pokemon, I wasn't like into Pokemon even at all, I could still get behind this game. So very cool that they would have this. Tony Hawk Pro Skater finally comes out for the Nintendo 64, and good thing. It actually plays very well. I played it mostly on other platforms, but the fact that we have Tony Hawk Pro Skater, which again plays very well on the Nintendo 64, you gotta love it. Came out in 2000, I love that. We have Battlezone, Rise of the Black Dogs. Now Battlezone, when I saw that, I was like, Battlezone like the old arcade game Battlezone? Well, kind of. You play as a tank, and you're doing tank-type things in Rise of the Black Dogs, where you go around in your tank and you shoot the other tanks and shoot down radars and stuff like that, too. The controls are not great, but then I had to remember that this is on a Nintendo 64, so the controls are already not going to be great. And then I double remembered that Battlezone in the arcade, the controls were not great. Actually, the controls were very good in the arcade. It made sense, where you have it's dual stick, and you push them both to go up, but you push like one this way and one that way so the tank to turn around and stuff like that. So it's, you know, one controls one side of the tank, one controls the other side of the tank. This one doesn't quite play like that. It's one of those games where the C button moves you and then your analog is your like aiming the target and stuff like that. Confusing at first. You did get used to it after playing the Nintendo 64 for a while. It's a little rough to go back to now though. Excitebike 64 comes out, and finally, because I was waiting for an Excitebike game for the Super Nintendo forever, and then we never even got a sequel to Excitebike on the NES, which is too bad. So we finally get Excitebike 64, and it's not bad. And I was like, okay, well, at this point, sure, it's gonna be a 64 game behind the back, racing around the tracks. I get it. And it actually controls pretty well. You can, you know, put your foot out to drag and, you know, stop and drag to, you know, flip around and stuff like that. But the fun of this game, and my best memory behind this game, is they had this on display at our local Software Etc. in our Yakima Mall, and they had Excitebike 64. Nobody cared. They went straight to the special tracks, because in Excitebike 64, once you once you do the tutorial stage, then it unlocks, you can just play Excitebike, the NES version, on the 64 cart. So my fun of this game is like, oh cool, here's that one game, but then people at Software Etc. were all playing the old school NES version of Excitebike, you know, on the display case. So I was like, that was kind of eye-opening for me to think like, okay, cool, I'm not the only one who's really still into all these retro games, even though there's newer games. The game itself, though, it's actually pretty decent. Perfect Dark comes out. For some reason, I thought it came out earlier than this. But man, Perfect Dark was the game that GoldenEye should have been. It's one of my favorite games on the Nintendo 64. I love me some Perfect Dark. Again, GoldenEye was great for its time, 4-player, having fun with friends. I don't think it aged that well, but great for the memories. Perfect Dark is a game I still like playing today, and I still think it's pretty cool, you know, for being a 64 game, you know what I mean? Bomberman 64 Second Attack is Bomberman with a story. So now you play as Bomberman, you can do your bombs, you have a little side buddy too that can help you out, but you still have to blow up enemies with your bombs. The good news is with these Bomberman games, If you don't want to do the story mode, you just like old school Bomberman, nothing wrong with that. You can still play old school Bomberman with that grid and blowing the bombs and defeating the enemies. They're going to give you that too, but you have a story mode as well, so that's kind of fun. They came out with StarCraft 64. Now, I had a few friends at the time who were kind of more into PC games. Consoles were there too, but they were more about the PC stuff. And even though I did have a computer at this time, finally, I did not grow up a PC gamer. I was a console gamer my whole life. Still am. But I had some friends who were more PC gamers, and then they had better computers, and then they were more able to play games like StarCraft. So I recognized StarCraft as being a computer game, but now on the 64. So very advantageous of them. I don't think it's a complete port. I've heard that it's not exactly... it's not the optimal way to play StarCraft, first and foremost. It just gives you that option if you're not a computer gamer, but you have a Nintendo 64. But there's other things you can do, like you can do like cooperative mode and stuff like that. Again, all from only what I've read. I looked at it for a couple seconds. I've never been into the real-time strategy style games. For me, it's usually a pass, but it was a game that came out in the 64 in the year 2000. Fighters Destiny 2 comes out. Now, we talked about Fighters Destiny briefly in another video, and this is the sequel and more of the same, where it's less about taking down their health bar and more about a point system. If you throw them, that's worth so many points. If you get them to go out of bounds, it's worth so many points. Up front, when you first play it, it looks a whole lot like a Virtua Fighter. Very Virtua Fighter on the grid, you can knock him out of bounds, but then once you do a certain move, or once you counter move, or once you knock him down or something like that, that's when you get your points, and then so many points beats the stages. So, interesting take on a fighting game. It's alright. Kirby 64 comes out. It's one of my favorite Kirby games because I loved the idea that you could combine powers. I loved the idea that you could have like static shock, and then you can have fire, and you put them together, and it becomes like friction burn in a way, or or things like that. And so it was fun to see what you could create when you combine different abilities. Pretty simple for a Kirby game, slower moving than most other Kirby games, although Kirby games are usually kind of easily paced, if that makes sense. This one may be a little bit slower, but still very fun. We had a Transformers Beast Wars game. Now, I grew up with Transformers, the OG, the original, the Generation 1, and I was never into Beast Wars. Beast Wars, I was just like, I'm out. I didn't even give it a chance. But the Nintendo 64 game, I at least had a look at it, and it was just another 2D fighting game. However, in this one, you can transform both into not really a vehicle, but kind of like a vehicle, and you can also transform into your beast mode. But still, it's a fighting game, and not a very good fighting game. It's more about like you turn into things, but you're still like launching missiles and stuff at each other. It's something. It's an idea. We had Army-Men Air Combat, and the Army-Men game I thought was pretty fun. You play as little plastic army men turned into a video game. Hey, what a cool idea, right? Well, this one is more of the aerial version, so you can play as like a helicopter, for instance, blowing up bases, or you are delivering items or something like that. Every stage is not a very big stage. It's just enough to maneuver around and dodge the enemy fire and stuff like that too. But it was worth a rental, I thought. We had Carmageddon 64, and I was excited to play it because with a game like Carmageddon, first of all, the name alone sounds like fun to me. Carmageddon? Are you kidding me on this? So it's more of a racing game. I was hoping for more like Twisted Metal. Again, I love Twisted Metal. I was hoping for more of that. This is less that, more racing game, but there are people in the street that you can run over for points. So a little bit more of like the death race. Remember that? That was the thing. But no. Again, it was also worth the rental. Duck Dodgers and the 24th and a half century. I remember even at this time, again, 25 years ago, when you think about it now, I remember even at this time, I was like, do kids today who play Nintendo 64, do they even know who Duck Dodgers is? I mean, because I grew up with Looney Tunes, and I grew up with Looney Tunes, the reruns, along with whatever the newer stuff that they were doing for Looney Tunes stuff. But again, even for my time, it was mostly reruns. And they didn't do that a whole lot during this time. There was still a little bit during the year 2000, but it wasn't as prevalent, I think, or popular as Looney Tunes were in the 80s and 90s, especially like the early 90s. But either way, they made a Duck Dodgers game. It's another 3D platformer at the end of the day. You jump and you can kick with your cartoony kick, but why not? Have Marvin the Martian in it. Marvin the Martian, well, no, this is year 2000. I remember Marvin the Martian had a resurgence in like 1992, 93 or something like that. For some reason it was like super popular, again, for who knows what reason. It was like on all the t-shirts, never mind. Duck Dodgers came out in 2000. How about that? We had Hercules for the Nintendo 64. This is not the Disney Hercules. This is that live-action TV show Hercules. I was never into Hercules. I was never even really into Xena. My sisters were, so they would watch that, and it wasn't like a back-to-back block. It was like first Xena, then it's Hercules, and are they in the same universe? But they're on their own TV show? I don't know. The game was not great, and Hercules, the guy who plays Hercules, is also not great, so it came out, and I will just leave it at that. Quality investigative reporting as always with this guy here in these videos, right? Mario Tennis came out. Here's Nintendo trying to get us to do sports again. Why tennis? We had Mario Golf and then Mario Tennis. Can we get Mario Dodgeball, please? Wouldn't that be something? Was there ever even a Mario Basketball? I don't know. Well, Mario Tennis, it's tennis. It's tennis. I've played some of the tennis games, and there's a while there where like, well, no, 2000, so this would have been still year-around with Dreamcast. And what was that Dreamcast game? I know we're talking about 64, now here I am talking about Dreamcast. Virtua Tennis? What was that tennis game on the 64 that was like super popular? It was something like that. Well, anyway, here's Mario Tennis. That I don't know if it was just trying to say like, oh, hey, tennis is popular again. Let's go for that. People will just buy anything with Mario's face on it. So yeah, why not have a tennis game and just put Mario on it? We had Turok 3 Shadow of Oblivion. Now Turok, again, I love the first Turok. Second Turok was kind of getting out of range for me where I was just like, I just want the old school through the jungles and all that. None of this futuristic with aliens. And then Turok 3, a little bit more of that, but it did kind of bring it back a little bit, I thought. So for some reason, when Turok 3 came around, I was like, you know what? I'm going to accept it. And I'm glad I did because Turok 3 is actually kind of decent. We had San Francisco Rush 2049, another San Francisco Rush game, this time in the future. What makes it futuristic? Well, the cars and how the cities look kind of futuristically, but not really. But it's another racing game, and people love the Rush series, so it's like, hey, why don't you tweak a couple of things, and people will buy it, and they did. It's a decent racing game. If you love the Rush series, gotta have this one, man. It's one of the best. There's a game called Rat Attack that a lot of people don't really talk about for the Nintendo 64. It's a puzzle game, and I do love my puzzle games. So with Rat Attack, you play as a cat. First of all, you get to choose your cat, so that's kind of fun. And this is before cats were, like, internet popular. I mean, they were still popular, of course they were, but they weren't, like, as put up on a pedestal like they are, like, even now. So you get to play as a cat, and you get to catch these rats by kind of drawing a square. You know how you do with Photoshop or a tool, like, so you start here, and then the more you stretch out, the square becomes bigger. So you create that, and that's your trap to catch the rats. And after you catch so many rats, then you move on to the next stage. And of course, other stages become more and more populated with whatever else too. But kind of a fun puzzle game. And it was cool to see a puzzle game like this come out during this time on the 64. It's like, that's great. I'll take it. We had Pokemon Puzzle League. Pokemon Puzzle League. Now we have another great 2D puzzle game that could also come out for like Game Boy and stuff like that too. But you'll have it on the Nintendo 64. Why wouldn't you? First of all, it's Pokemon. It didn't need to be Pokemon. It could be literally anything else, but why not call it Pokemon? Kind of like a match 3, but you can flip the 2 tiles at a time, and whether it's like a cross or down, I know I said a cross or down, that, sorry, the meds I'm on, a cross or down, you can eliminate those pieces, and you go like look for those combos too. So like when you eliminate these pieces and these ones fall, and then it'll create another chain of events. Very, very fun game, very addicting. I actually like this game quite a bit. Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue. This is one of those games that not a lot of people like. First of all, it's the Power Rangers game, but not like the good Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, like the OG. It's like now it's the Light Speed or Light Force or whatever that current generation was for this time. So turn that into a video game. And then it's just not really Power Rangers-y. Like you're cleaning up spills and stuff like that too. Which there's more to it. There is a little bit of mode where you can like do like Zord battles or something, and even that's a little kind of lackluster. So a lot of people, you know, consider this, it's in a lot of those lists of like the worst games on the 64. This one comes up a lot. When you see for yourself, you might understand why.
Nuts! Rats! Trash! Curses! Bully!
We have The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, and I remember when this game came out, I wasn't interested in it as much as I love Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda is one of my favorite series of all time. It is for many people as well. And I loved Ocarina of Time. But when Majora's Mask came out, I couldn't tell you why. I'm trying to remember. But I was like, I had zero interest in playing it. Because I think to me, it felt like it was a side story. It was like, I already played Ocarina of Time. And like, this is like, what, DLC for Ocarina of Time? It's like a little side mission, side story. It took me years to actually finally pick up a controller and play it. And then when I finally did play it, I still didn't care for it. I know a lot of people really, really like this game. If it didn't have that clock mechanic, I know, which is what makes that game. It's like that's the gimmick behind the game, is the time mechanic where if you don't do the thing, you have to go back in time and try it all over again and stuff like that. I know that's the reason behind the game, but if it didn't have that, or if it was something else, then I would have liked this game a lot more. But man, I tried to get into it and I just couldn't. But a lot of people really, really like this game, and they like it for their own reasons. And I do like that creepy moon. I just loved playing that game and looking up and seeing this giant smile. Oh man, that was cool. That was my favorite part, was just looking up and seeing this creepy moon. And then there's a lot of other little creepy images in this game too, like when you put on the masks and you just kind of like scream in a very haunting scream kind of thing, like you actually sound like you're in trauma. We have Tigger's Honey Hunt. We have a Winnie the Pooh game starring Tigger, and again, very much so made for kids. You play as Tigger, you grab the honey, I guess. I guess you can jump. I don't know. It's Tigger. I mean, it's a Tigger game for the 64. Definitely for kids. Doesn't mean I didn't play it, but I at least played it for a little bit. Hey You Pikachu, another Pokemon game. Why not capitalize on the Pokemon game? There's like 5 Pokemon games that came out for the 64 during this year, it seems like. Hey You Pikachu was a game that required the microphone to interact with Pikachu on your Nintendo 64. I'll be honest with you, I've never played this game because I've never had the microphone to play this game for the 64. So I don't know if it's more of an interactive experience. I don't know if there are games you can play, but I sure know you've played it. Rugrats in Paris. Boy, this is that orange VHS tape that you run across when you're looking for VHS tapes here. Rugrats in Paris. 3D kind of a, not really a platformer really, but like a 3D exploration. There's like little mini games you can play along the way too, for people who are really into Rugrats, or even older people who were familiar with Rugrats, but it's like, oh, I'll play that as a video game. That's got to be pretty cool. It was very popular for the time, so why not check out Rugrats in Paris? And then on the flip side, you have Ogre Battle 64. Is it the best role-playing game on the Nintendo 64? Some people might think so. Ogre Battle is its own kind of thing. There was an Ogre Battle game for the Super Nintendo, and then there was Ogre Battle 64. It controls, I'm trying to think of a game that it might play similar to. Not really like Shining Force, but no, not really. I mean, it's kind of its own, you know, there's like the battles and the words and the dialogues and the graphics I thought were really cool. It had that cool, a lot of games look like this now, but Ogre Battle was one of the first ones that I saw that looked like, it was like the illustration of the characters, and then when you go into the battle, then you can do the basic, not basic, I shouldn't say basic, but that kind of RPG style game, like JRPG, turn-based, still some strategy involved in there too, pretty in-depth for a Nintendo 64 game, so very cool to see this at the time. Tom and Jerry Fists of Fury came out for the 64, the year 2000, middle of the year. This is one of those room environmental fighting games. So you have Tom, you have Jerry, you have other unlockable characters later as well, and it's that kind of room battle. I always think of Power Stone when I think of something like this, but it's that kind of brawling game, but in a environment, and you can like run all around and beat up the people that way. But it's a Tom and Jerry game, so of course you're beating someone up. Mickey's Speedway came out for the 64, another Mario Kart clone, this time with the Disney characters like Mickey, Minnie. You can play as Donald. I always love playing as Donald in any game where you have the option to play as Donald Duck, because he usually gets like the opposite end of whatever's cool. It always happens to Donald Duck, so always love to see that play through too. But a very good game. It actually controls very well. It's very smooth. A great kart racer if you're done with Mario Kart or want to take a break from it or something like that. Mickey's Speedway actually plays very, very well, I thought. Ready to Rumble Round 2, it's basically the second Ready to Rumble game. This one was cool too because Ready to Rumble was that boxing game, but a little bit arcadey, so it was a little bit over the top, a little cartoony. Michael Buffer's voice, the ring announcer, the Get Ready to Rumble guy, it's his voice in the game. It's actually like literally him, so that's kind of cool too. I can't even say it because it's, you know, copyright and everything. However, I didn't like it as much as a lot of other people did, but I still enjoyed playing this game quite a bit. It was fun to see that they had another fighting game, but have it be a boxing game. And Ready to Rumble, both of the games, I mean, it's a game I wish would come back. I think it'd be really fun by today's standards, for sure. Ooh, maybe in VR. That'd be kind of fun. There's already a couple boxing games in VR, but yeah, that one might be pretty cool. Midway's Greatest Hits Volume 1. They could have just called it Midway's Greatest Arcade Hits or whatever, because there's only the one volume on the 64. But this was such a great collection of arcade games that maybe this is the first time that some of these people have played these arcade versions of games without it being like the NES version, if that makes sense. Because Spy Hunter's on here. And Spy Hunter, it's the arcade version. Most people maybe have only played the NES version. But I loved Spy Hunter in the arcade. My local Tiger Mart, which was a little mini mart gas station a couple blocks from where I grew up, had Spy Hunter for years. And I always played it, man, as often as I could. So loved me some Spy Hunter, but on top of Spy Hunter, it also had Defender, it had Robotron 2084, it had Sinistar, it had Root Beer Tapper. Now, it did not have Tapper because that's Budweiser, but it had Root Beer Tapper because it's also Nintendo 64, so you gotta go Root Beer. Very good arcade port on the 64 for Tapper. Tapper was one of my favorite games of all time. And they also had like an arcade trivia, which I thought was kind of fun. So you can actually answer questions about some of these arcade games just for fun. So all of those things in one cartridge, that Midway's Arcade Classic Greatest Hits Volume 1, whatever it's called. It's the Midway Arcade Greatest Hits. I don't, you know what I mean. WWF No Mercy comes out. So many people consider this the best wrestling game of all time. Hard to argue that. I don't agree with that because Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 exists. However, WWF No Mercy is an excellent wrestling game. It has all the things that made WrestleMania 2000 great, then made it even better. There's a few things that are still missing from some of the other wrestling games. I mean, there's some things that are missing even from like WCW NWO Revenge that aren't in No Mercy, like the ability to create a character or to have a character who goes into a fighting stance. And then instead of like doing a suplex or body slam, you're in a fighting stance and then the different buttons are different attacks, which I loved doing that for some of the like the shoot fighters. But again, No Mercy has so much going on for itself. It was one of the best times of professional wrestling was during this time. So it was the game to have, and anybody could pick it up and play it. Still fun today. Blues Brothers 2000 is an underrated, in my opinion, 3D platformer on the 64. I think it's a really good game. I've seen other lists, and I've seen people say, like, it's not as good as Mario 64. Well, that's true. However, you can't just rely on that and have that be the whole thing. I think it's a great 3D platformer. If you haven't checked it out, might want to check it out. I think it's pretty cool anyway. Banjo-Tooie comes out, so we get the sequel to Banjo-Kazooie, funnily named Banjo-Tooie, and more the same. I mean, what else can you say about that? If you love the Banjo-Kazooie style game, this is what you're playing on the Nintendo 64, because I have a feeling that so many people who had a 64, and maybe this was their core system when they were younger, maybe didn't have a PlayStation, maybe didn't have the Saturn or Dreamcast by now at this point. They were stuck with the 64, so Banjo-Tooie, are you going through Banjo-Kazooie? Here's more for you called Banjo-Tooie, and just kind of setting things up for Conquer, which is coming out next year, but we'll talk about that in another video. Spider-Man comes out. Now, I mostly played this on the PlayStation 1, but Spider-Man, this is not based on any movie or anything at this time. Spider-Man, the movie, with Tobey Maguire comes out, was it 2000? Oh, it was 2000. It was either 2001 or 2002. It may have been 2002. I remember because of the poster for 2001, they couldn't really show that. Anyway, this is Spider-Man based on the comics. Very fun. I love me some Spider-Man. And this is interesting because when you swing your web, it just kind of goes up into the screen as if there's a building there or something that you can't really see. So you can kind of swing wherever you want. Unlike the newer Spider-Man games now where you actually have to attach onto something that you can see in front of you or a building or something. This one you can just kind of, it's like, okay, I'm just going to swing across with, it's going to attach to a cloud. It's going to attach to a crane that you don't see. But it's still a great Spider-Man game and super, super fun. I love me as a Spider-Man game. And this one's really, really good. Scooby-Doo, Classic Creep Caper. This game is another exploration. You look around, you use items on things. It's like, oh, I'm going to use this on that. You collect the clues, you do the thing. There's several times where you play as Shaggy in this game, and Scooby-Doo is right next to you as well. And annoyingly, sometimes the other characters are just kind of hanging around. It's like, oh, we need this to go up there. And they wait for you. It's like, well, I mean, why don't you get it? You know, you're so in charge here. So it was okay. I didn't play it as long as probably other people may have, but I looked at it for a little bit. It's that Resident Evil style where the camera angle changes. So you have the camera angle set. It's almost like you're playing this game through the eyes of like security cameras, like a Resident Evil or a Silent Hill. But I'm not going to call this game a Silent Hill clone like that Piglet game that keeps on getting popular. Instead, that's just the angle. So like when you're walking around, you know, you're like, I'm going to walk over here. Then all of a sudden the screen changes and you're like walking over here and you got to change your controller method and, you know, it's all right. We get the best WWF wrestling game with No Mercy. And in the same year, a month or so later, we get WCW Backstage Assault, which is probably the worst WCW game for the Nintendo 64.
If it's injury that you want, my friend, it's injury that you're gonna get!
There is a joy with this game that's just silly. Now, it's a wrestling game, but there's no wrestling ring. WCW Backstage Assault, as the name says, you wrestle backstage. Like, there's no ring, but you're still wrestling. Like, you're still doing wrestling moves, but just you're backstage or at the loading docks or something like that. And it's just weird. And it looks ugly. The characters look crazy. It's one of those games where they also included, like, kind of the non-wrestlers in there, too. Like, you can play as Jimmy Hart. You can play as like Doug Dillinger, who was like head of security or whatever. It's like what, really? A lot of unlockables, so that's kind of cool. I like games where you have like, you know, other people you can unlock later by, you know, just by playing the game and everything like that too. It doesn't look great. Like, it looks like it came out like 6 years earlier, but it didn't. So it's unfortunate. Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker. This is another Batman game. This one's Batman Beyond. So this is like the newer Batman when you have Bruce Wayne as the older guy. It was like that version, like that cartoon or whatever, that comic, I suppose. I guess Batman came from comics. I know this game a little bit. It's another game that shows up in a lot of those lists. It's kind of monotonous. It's another, like a brawler in a way, but not really a brawler. For some reason, I think like Golden Axe when I think of a game like this, where it's like you go a little bit and you fight off a couple enemies, and you go a little bit more and you fight off a couple more enemies. You might have to destroy a box to get the key to open the door and stuff like that, but I mean, for a Batman game, you want more than this. And here's Batman Beyond, and I was hoping that this game would have a lot more going on for itself. It's unfortunate. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, I thought was funny because this game plays a lot like Tomb Raider. And Tomb Raider is basically like an Indiana Jones style idea for Tomb Raider. And then you have an Indiana Jones game for the 64, which is actually a really decent game, but it controls like Tomb Raider. So if you loved Tomb Raider, which was inspired by Indiana Jones, and you want to play an Indiana Jones game where the gameplay is inspired by Tomb Raider, comes full circle. And here you go. And I also thought it was kind of weird because it was like Indiana Jones, but your tool menu looks way too close to like Ocarina of Time. I was like, oh, there's that. So you got your gun, you got your weapon, got your ocarina. Perfect. Or your it doesn't work that way. But that would be funny. Maybe we gotta have a mod for that or something. Star Wars Episode 1 Battle of Naboo. This is a Star Wars game where you're always behind the cockpit of something. So every stage is a different ship, which I think is kind of fun. So it might even start out, I think like the first stage you're like on a little like land speeder, but like in the city, like an escort mission. You gotta like shoot the other enemies to help your one guy, you know, get through the town and everything like that too. But then the later stages, you're in outer space doing the basic Star Wars stuff, flying around, shooting things. Totally decent game. I do like the Star Wars games. And this one is just kind of fun because every stage you're kind of flying a different ship, which I think is pretty fun. You have Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. That's right, Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. This game is a 64 version of Crash Bandicoot. As if they had Crash Bandicoot on the 64 and you removed Crash and you put in Donald Duck, here you go. It's that kind of behind the view, walking forward from behind the shoulder. A little bit of 3D elements and everything like that too. You're attacking things, you're jumping, you're double jumping. There's a little bit where you can kind of go left and right, but not a lot with a game like this. Pretty decent to check out, pretty fun. The Disney games are usually pretty cool. They've got it with Donald Duck Goin' Quackers. It's like Crash Bandicoot, but with Donald Duck. Gotta love that. And that'll wrap up Nintendo 64 for the year 2000. We have another year to go. Maybe even a couple more years. Well, we'll cover that in the next video. That's coming out soon. Thank you for subscribing. I hope you loved it. And we've been doing this. We've already covered the other years for the 64. We've covered all the years for Nintendo and Super Nintendo. Check out those videos too. We'll see you real soon.